As discussed in Part 1, the 222 passage refers to the passageway between 22 and 20 West Wickham Road. The reader should note there is line of sight between the 222 passage and the Mausoleum, which has the 222 secret passage somewhere beneath it. The 222 passage and the 222 secret passage are two symbolically identical locations on the Mausoleum line, which suggest that West Wickham Hill and the Pastures Cross Road are connected somehow. The author believes that the Pastures Cross Road is a scaled-down version of some of the properties of West Wickham Hill, and can therefore reveal something about the site. As it is Dashwood featured in the poem about the 222 secret passage and J. Bond engraved in the stone above the 222 passage, we can connect Dashwood to J. Bond, through what will be called the 222 synchronicity. J. Bond is synonymous with James Bond, the famous MI6 spy, created by author and naval intelligence officer, Ian Fleming. Through the 222 synchronicity, we are being told that Sir Francis Dashwood is an equivalent of the MI6 operative James Bond of literary fiction, and that a now hidden part of the caves were probably a place of his operation. The 222 synchronicity is what the author calls a multi-thread synchronicity, because it is at least three synchronicities wrapped up in one, thus reducing chance factors in the connection, thereby making it a largely apophenia-free and highly reliable expression of the facts surrounding Dashwood and the caves. To put it another way, the multi-thread aspect of the 222 synchronicity is its own self-reinforcing and self-validating quality that makes it meaningful. Here's an overview of the three threads. Thread 1, the J. Bond stone at the 222 passage connects directly to Dashwood through the poem about the 222 secret passage. Thread 2, there is line of sight between the Mausoleum and the 222 passage where the J. Bond stone is located. Note that the Mausoleum is directly over the caves. Thread 3, the Mausoleum line where the J. Bond stone is located, has a geographic bearing of 116 degrees. As the viewer will soon learn, 116 is an equivalent of MI6. The third point is the weaker of the three, but is a connection nonetheless. The 222 synchronicity ties a persona to a geographic location, in this case, an intelligence operative to a secret part of the caves. The 116-911 synchronicity ties an act to a geographic location, in this case an act of conspiracy to West Wickham Hill. As the 222 synchronicity features on the Mausoleum line, which has a 116-degree geographic bearing, one could reason that the 222 synchronicity is an integral sub-synchronicity of the 116-911 synchronicity. The reader is reminded that the caves were, and still are, owned by the Dashwood family, and that the Mausoleum and West Wickham Road were built on what was probably then part of the Dashwood estate. In fact, the Dashwoods used to own much of the land around West Wickham, perhaps as far out as Oak Ridge Road, which is close to the High Wycombe town centre. As the Mausoleum line and MI6 are covered with the same numerology that derives from the 116-911 master code, these coincidences suggest that the Dashwood estate is part of an apparatus associated with occultism, spycraft, and espionage. The synchronicities surrounding the J. Bond stone suggests that Dashwood was involved, but in what capacity, and to what extent, is unclear. Is there any conventional documentary evidence that implies Dashwood was involved in intelligence operations? Research by Michael Howard from newdawnmagazine.com says there is.
In the 18th century, the Secret Service became concerned at the activities of the so-called Hellfire Club, founded by Sir Francis Dashwood, later the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and a close friend and political advisor of King George III. As a young man, Dashwood went on the Grand Tour of Europe, that was compulsory for aristocrats, and he was initiated into a Masonic lodge in France. It has been claimed secret agents infiltrated the Hellfire Club, because of its many famous members. They included, the Earl of Sandwich, John Montagu, who was the First Lord of the Admiralty, the Paymaster General Thomas Potter, several members of Parliament, the Lord Mayor of London, a son of the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Earl of Bute, who was the Prime Minister, and it has been claimed even the Prince of Wales. At least 4 members of the group were known to be actively involved in espionage. There was a radical MP called John Wilkes, a transvestite French diplomat, Chevalier d'Eon de Beaumont, the American statesman and philosopher Benjamin Franklin, and Sir Francis Dashwood himself. Wilkes had allegedly recruited the Chevalier into the British Secret Service. During his stay in Russia on the Grand Tour, Dashwood had spied on the court of the Tsar, through his close friendship with the Grand Duchess Catherine. In Italy, he gathered intelligence on the exiled Stuart dynasty, and their supporters, although the head of the British Secret Service in Rome believed Dashwood was a Jacobite agent. In fact, he was only pretending to support the Stuart cause, and was passing on information about their activities directly back to London. In later years, Sir Francis and Benjamin Franklin were involved in a clandestine plan to reconcile the American colonists and the British government, to prevent the War of Independence.
The conspiracy researcher, David Icke, adds indirect evidence in his book, The Perception Deception, as to the direction of Dashwood's leanings.
The mausoleum stands on top of the cave network established for the rituals of the Satanic Hellfire Club, of Archon bloodline government minister and aristocrat, Sir Francis Dashwood, and American independence hero, Benjamin Franklin, who was actually a covert agent for the British Crown all along. The Crown wanted the Americans to have fake independence, so they could replace overt control with the far more effective covert control. These two Satanists revised the Christian Book of Common Prayer. This would appear to be ironic until you consider the true background to Christianity.
Well, well, well. Fancy running into Sir Francis and that great American friend of his, Benjamin Franklin. Franklin often stayed at West Wickham and visited the caves in 1772. He wrote afterwards to a friend, Mr. Dacour, in Philadelphia,
"The exquisite sense of classical design, charmingly reproduced by Sir Francis Dashwood at West Wickham, whimsical and puzzling as it sometimes may be in its imagery, is as much evident below the earth as it is above it. I must admit, you have some exceeding odd ideas, Francis. Fancy putting the golden ball on top of the church. John Wilkes tells me that it is the best globe tavern ever."
And finally, in his book, In Defense of Conspiracy Theories, Brian Nugent says of the Hellfire Club,
There are 2 remarkable aspects to this group, I think. First, while it was involved in political conspiracies, its membership included politicians from a wide political spectrum, who in fact in public life were nominally opposed to one another. So for example, the greatest popular radical of the day, John Wilkes, was known for his vicious attacks on the Earl of Bute, and later the Earl of Sandwich, who were at the same time secretly his colleagues in this cult. This political controversy, which culminated in Sandwich reading a lewd poem of Wilkes into the record of the House of Lords, dominated the political discourse of the day, and now some historians who have looked at the club's activities in detail, feel it was all along some kind of sham operation. Presumably, they felt that by opposing each other in this way, as the extreme ends of an artificially polarized political climate, they could dominate the political life of the country, and drown out their real critics. The other thing to note about this cult, is that the members seemed to control the intelligence apparatus of the UK at this time. 2 key government positions in the intelligence system at this time, were probably First Lord of the Admiralty, in the UK, and later the US. The origins of the modern intelligence system are usually traced to groups under the control of the Navy, and Postmaster General, because of its role in the interception of mail, and both sinecures were held by members of the club for most of these years. That they were interested in the espionage game, we can see from this quote from A History of Cryptology. The next cryptologist of note was Sir Francis Dashwood, a larger-than-life character, who managed to combine his spying and cryptology, with diversions such as gambling, devil worship, and debauchery. As to the cryptology, Dashwood has been reported as both Crown and Jacobite agents in the 1740s, but was in truth probably a double agent for the Crown. Certainly, by catering to the lusts of powerful people, he made powerful friends, serving as Chancellor of the Exchequer for a few months in 1762, and as Postmaster General, de facto controller of the British Black Chambers, remember, from 1766 to 1781, and it was in this latter role that he was visited in 1773, by the American Deputy Postmaster General, Benjamin Franklin. 4 members of Dashwood's Hellfire Club were undoubtedly mixed up in espionage, and gained much of their intelligence through belonging to it. Almost certainly, several of the other members were at one time or another working for British intelligence. The 4 were John Wilkes, the Chevalier Dion de Beaumont, a French diplomat, Sir Francis Dashwood himself, and, surprisingly enough, Benjamin Franklin, the statesman and philosopher.
Howard's testimony makes Dashwood look like a proto-James Bond. Ikes suggests he was practicing some form of occultism, and Nugent's indicates that the Hellfire Club was an intelligence-gathering operation disguised as a satanic cult. The viewer should be aware that the author had absolutely no idea Dashwood was an intelligence operative, and only began looking for supporting evidence after being prompted by the 222 Synchronicity. These published reports are tantalizing, but they lack the original documentation to back them up. For the sake of argument, we will assume that they are reliable, and proceed on the assumption that Dashwood was indeed a government intelligence operative, and that therefore, the author's analysis of the 222 Synchronicity is correct. Other authors have commented on Dashwood's occult leanings, his ecclesiastic lampoonery, and his openly satanic practices, but little hard evidence has been presented for the satanic components, other than the theatrical presentations put on for his club members' edification. Dashwood did have an interest in the Eleusinian mysteries, which was a Greek shamanic goddess-worshipping cult. This would qualify him as an occultist of sorts, but not as a Satanist, as the two paradigms have opposing ideologies, unless of course Dashwood outwardly held these opposing ideologies with an ulterior motive. Michael Howard points out,
rumors circulated in the coffee houses of London, that the friars practiced sexual orgies featuring aristocratic ladies and prostitutes dressed up as nuns. There were also satanic rites, such as black masses, where the naked body of a noble woman acted as an altar. However, according to one senior member of the Hellfire Club, this occult mummery was just an amusing diversion for the dandies. The inner circle of the order was actually dedicated to the serious revival of the pagan Eleusinian mysteries, and the worship of the Bona Dea, or Great Mother Goddess. Dashwood's present-day descendant, also called Sir Francis, confirmed this fact in a BBC radio interview some years ago.
The reports of satanic activity, black magic, and sexual orgies at the Hellfire Club probably originate from the superficial displays put on for its members, to obscure the organization's true purpose, that being a governmental intelligence gathering operation that probably utilized occult methodology to some extent. The occult elements of the operation may have enhanced its effectiveness, but not defined it. The same applies for Dashwood's Grand Tour of Europe, which would have been another governmental intelligence operation, this time disguised as an aristocratic rite. Despite the fact that the fictitious James Bond and real-life Francis Dashwood had reputations as womanizers and drinkers, these synchronistic connections are about themes and concepts only, and should not be used to infer specific details, unless the evidence indicates otherwise. For example, it would be unreasonable to think that Dashwood had killed in real life, because Bond did in fiction. If Dashwood had done so, it almost certainly would have been in the line of duty, and under order from his superiors.